The goal for today is to be able to find the midpoint of a segment. First off, the vocabulary word midpoint means the point on a segment exactly halfway between the endpoints of a segment. So, for example, if you have a segment such as this segment XY, the midpoint could be this point Z here, such that XZ is equal to ZY. Next, we also have the term segment bisector. A segment bisector is any segment or line or plane that intersects a segment at its midpoint. So, for example, if I had another line going through this, let's call it line L, and it intersects at point Z, it intersects a segment. Since it intersects segment XY at its midpoint, point Z, line L is a segment bisector. Okay, the formula in order to find the midpoint on a number line is this formula here. This is extremely important. Make sure you know it. Basically, the midpoint is the average. So if you are looking at this number line here, if you have the two x values x1 and x2, in order to find the halfway point between those two numbers, you would normally take the average. Notice we're just averaging x1 and x2 by adding them together and dividing by 2. Be careful, the most common mistake on this formula is using subtraction instead of addition. So just remember it as average and you shouldn't make that mistake. Okay, this example problem says, Jacinta wants to hang a picture 15 inches from the left side of the wall. How far from the left edge of the wall should she mark the location for the nail that the picture will hang on if the right edge is 37.5 inches from the wall's left side? So I've already drawn a diagram here. Make sure you go ahead and draw that as well. In order to find where the picture should hang, you should know that in order to hang a picture, we want it to be hanging directly in the center. Basically, if we drew this out on a number line, we would have 15 here, 37.5 here, because they're the distance from 0. 0 is where the left side of the wall is. And we want to find the halfway point between 15 and 37. This would be the midpoint of 15 and 37.5. So we'll let 15 be x1, 37.5 be x2, and we want to find the coordinate of the midpoint. The formula is the average. So the midpoint is 15 plus 37.5 divided by 2. Hopefully you know that there's an imaginary parentheses around this numerator, so we must complete that addition first. So that gives us 52.5 divided by 2. So we know the midpoint between those two endpoints is 26.25. And now, since this is a word problem, we need to interpret this. Basically, the picture should hang .25 inches from the left side of the wall, or from the wall. If you don't already know, this symbol here with the two little dashes means inches. When you do one dash, it means feet. Let's try another problem. This one is a little bit simpler. So this one is example 3. It says find the midpoint between -5 and 8. So we can let x1 be -5 and x2 be 8. And we'll just use the formula. Basically, we're averaging. So we get the midpoint is equal to -5 plus 8 divided by 2. Again, remember there's an imaginary parentheses around this numerator, so we have to complete that addition first. -5 plus 8 is 3 over 2. You can also think of this as 8 minus 5. 3 over 2 can be your answer, or you can rewrite it as a mixed number, such as 1.5, or you can rewrite it as a decimal, such as 1.5. Any of those 3 options is the correct answer. Go ahead and try the practice problems below. Here's the correct answer. It was actually the same as the problem above. Next, I want to show you the formula for the midpoint on a coordinate plane. Basically, you have to average the x's and average the y's. So you have to make sure that you keep the x values together and the y values together. And that'll give you the x coordinate of the midpoint and the y coordinate of the midpoint. Let's try a problem together. It says find the coordinates of M, the midpoint of segment ST, for S negative 6, 3 and T 1, 0. I already plotted the points S and T, so now I'm ready to find the midpoint. The formula, I need to label x1, y1, x2, y2 first, and now I can plug them in. So the formula, remember, was what I had highlighted here, the average of the x's and the average of the y's. So the midpoint, we're going to average the x's. So we have negative 6 plus 1 divided by 2, and our y coordinate is the average of the y's. So 3 plus 0 divided by 2. Okay, so we can simplify this. Negative 6 plus 1 is negative 5. 3 plus 0 is 3. And we can go from here. We can leave it, our answer, in fraction form, or we can put them as decimals. So we could change it to negative 2.5, comma 1.5 if you'd like, but the fraction form was just as good. Now, you don't really need to plot these points out on the coordinate plane, but it is a convenient way to check your answer. So once you get your answer, negative 2.5, comma 1.5, you could plot it just to check, does it look kind of like it's the midpoint of points S and T? I would say, yeah, it looks right. Another way that you could check, remember this distance from S to M should be the same as the distance from M to T. Alright, pause the video and try the practice problems below. Here are the correct answers. Make sure you're keeping your x's together and your y's together. The most common mistake, like I said, is mixing up x's and y's. Alright, this next problem says find the coordinates of J if K, negative 1, 2 is the midpoint of segment JL and L has the coordinates 3, negative 5. So for these problems, I would not waste time plotting these out on a coordinate plane. What I would do is just plot out, so we have the segment JL and K is the midpoint. So I know K is at negative 1, 2, and L is 3, negative 5. This just kind of helps me get my information organized. I know that this is not how the line or the segment would look on a coordinate plane, but I don't really care about that. I'm looking for the coordinates of J, so I'll just call the coordinates x, comma, y. Now I know for the midpoint, the formula is x1 and y1, x2 and y2 will give us the midpoint. So if I took the midpoint for the x's, I would have x plus 3 divided by 2 would give me the x coordinate of the midpoint. The x coordinate of the midpoint is negative 1. Next, similarly, for the y coordinate, I would take y plus negative 5 divided by 2 would give me my y-coordinate for the midpoint, which is 2. Once I have the equations set up, then I can solve them. So to solve this, the first step to getting x by itself is not to subtract 3 on both sides, because remember, technically this numerator x plus 3 is in a parentheses. So I can't subtract 3 on both sides yet. The first step is I need to multiply by 2 on both sides to get rid of dividing by 2. So that gets me x plus 3 equals negative 2. Now I can subtract 3 on both sides, so I get that my x-coordinate is negative 5. Similarly, on the other problem, to find the y-coordinate, I can't just add 5 yet. I first have to multiply by 2 on both sides. 2 times 2 gives me 4. Then I can add 5 on both sides. 4 plus 5 is 9. Once I have the x-coordinate and the y-coordinate, now I know point J is the coordinate negative 5, 9. Now you could double check your answer by finding the midpoint of JL with the point that you found for J and the coordinate that they gave you for L, and double check, is it the point K? If not, you did something wrong. Pause the video and try the practice problem below. Here's the answer for the first one. The second one, I need you to answer for me. This is your problem for the day. Next, for example 6, it says find the measure of segment PQ if Q is the midpoint of segment PR. So if Q is the midpoint of segment PR, I know that PQ must be equal to the length of QR. That's what midpoint means. So if PQ is equal to QR, I can substitute in their expressions. The expression for PQ is 9y minus 2. The expression for QR is 14 plus 5y. Now I can solve this by subtracting 5y on both sides and adding 2 on both sides. So I get 4y equals 16. The next step is to divide both sides by 4, and you get y equals 4. This is great, however, that's not what they were asking us for. Make sure you always double check what was the question asking. The question was asking us to find the measure of segment PQ. So once you find y, you need to go back and plug it in for PQ. PQ is equal to 9y minus 2. So we know that we can plug in the value 4 for y. Multiplication comes before subtraction. 9 times 4 is 36. And then you can take the minus 2 after that. 36 minus 2 is 34. So the final answer is PQ equals 34. Pause the video and try the problem below. Make sure you draw out the diagram first. Here are the correct answers. On part B, there are a couple ways you could have done this. I showed both. Either way, you should get the same answer. And finally, this question is what I'd like you to answer for me today. Reflect on this. How can you prove that your answer for the midpoint between 2 points on a coordinate plane is correct? This is a problem such as example 4. How could you prove to me that this answer for the midpoint is correct? That's all I have today. Thanks, guys.